If you enjoy this content, why not consider supporting it on Patreon? Perks include early access to new videos, which will always be 100% ad-free, as well as exclusive bonus content. A link is in the description. You can also help this channel by liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. But for now, enjoy the video.
Besides what you've told me, have you ever lied to get out of trouble?
No.
Are you lying to
Smoked
protect
marijuana?
Peyton
Yes.
Hobart?
Have you ever had
Aside
sex
from the
with one of your
occasion you
teachers?
mentioned in your application.
St. Sebastian High School.
Was this teacher Blair Watson?
Knock it
Yes.
off.
Have you ever physically harmed another
Son,
person?
I've been doing polygraph examinations since you
No,
were
I didn't.
swimming in
You
your daddy's
marooned on an
water.
island called Leanne Youth for 5 years.
So I know all the tricks.
I can tell fairly easily if someone's lying or not. All you have to do is answer yes or no.
Spend the night here.
All right?
You killed Blair Watson.
Give it a whirl.
Have you killed me?
The polygraph has become somewhat of an icon in popular culture. The menacing box that can reveal the darkest secrets of the most deceptive souls. But is it a load of bollocks? That's a question that this video will attempt to convincingly answer in the affirmative over the course of the next hour. But before we get into the finer details of the technology, it's worth providing a quick primer on its history.
A history of the polygraph. The year is 1921. Charlie Chaplin debuts his first feature-length film. Warren G. Harding is sworn in as the 21st President of the United States. Babe Ruth hits a record-breaking 138th home run. And in Berkeley, California, a budding young physiologist and police officer named John Larson develops the first modern lie detector, a device which could measure a subject's blood pressure and respiration in real time, allowing those administrating tests to monitor sudden spikes in those vitals that were indicative of dishonesty. Larson named this machine the cardio-pneumo-psychograph. Catchy, huh? Word spread of Larson's curious contraption, and in August of that same year, a prime opportunity arose to put it to the test. A man by the name of William Hightower was under suspicion for the murder of San Francisco priest Patrick Heslin, and Larson was called upon to question Hightower on the matter while under the cardio-pneumo-psychograph's watchful eye. Science indicates Hightower's guilt, newspaper headlines read the following morning, and Hightower was convicted of the crime, all thanks to this groundbreaking new technology. That and the police found the typewriter used to write a ransom note, along with a blood-stained piece of burlap and sand from the burial site in Hightower's hotel room, which presumably also helped. Understandably, many were captivated by Larson's machine and its remarkable ability to catch out the crims, but none more so than this young whippersnapper, Leonard Keeler. Taken under Larson's wing as an apprentice before he had even graduated high school, Keeler was barely in his 20s when he first constructed his own version of the cardio-pneumo-psychograph. Over a period of time and after several refinements, Keeler had developed a more portable and user-friendly iteration of Larson's device that, in addition to measuring a subject's respiration and blood pressure, was also able to monitor their galvanic skin response, essentially a scientific term for how much a person is sweating. Showing more of a flair for marketing than his mentor, Keeler named his machine the Polygraph. And oh boy, did those babies fly off the shelves like hotcakes. Law enforcement all over the country wanted a piece, and Keeler rose to dizzying heights of fame for his innovations, even getting a chance to play himself in the pictures. Look, that's him! He's standing next to Jimmy Stewart. And who could blame a nation for becoming fascinated with this marvelous device? A machine that could see your breathing, your pulse, and your sweat? The deceivers of this world didn't stand a chance, and all an innocent man needed to do to clear his name was strap himself in. Only some didn't see it that way, not least so the courts. In fact, as far back as 1923, not long after John Larson's first version of the device helped put William Hightower in the slammer, the Supreme Court issued a decision on a case called Fry v. the United States that stated that evidence obtained through methods such as polygraph exams could only be admissible once said methods were sufficiently established to have gained general acceptance in the particular field in which they belong. And even in the years that had followed that decision, and with all the additional fine-tuning implemented by the likes of Leonard Keeler, the polygraph could still not be said to have obtained such a status. As a matter of fact, one of the device's biggest critics would wind up being none other than John Larson himself. In the years that followed the invention of his first machine, Larson endeavored to confirm its validity with a variety of experiments and consistently came up short, ultimately concluding that results rendered by lie detectors were totally inconclusive approximately 40% of the time. His protestations of the polygraph's legitimacy fell on deaf ears when it came to the likes of Keeler, however, who continued to promote and profiteer off it until his final days in 1949, where he died of a stroke at the age of 45 after his wife, who had recently left him, died in a plane crash. Though Larson outlived his young apprentice by a considerable stretch, his fate was in some ways just as depressing. Living in constant torment of his inability to reverse the growing influence of the machine that he had helped create, writing shortly before his death in 1965 that the machine had become a Frankenstein's monster. And with both of its key inventors dead and buried not long after the halfway point of the 20th century, the polygraph's influence over society would not just survive, but thrive, gaining a foothold in all sorts of places throughout the public and private sectors, and touching the lives of millions. The polygraph, the world's ultimate lie detector.
So what does it actually do, exactly? The polygraph monitors, in real time, a person's respiration using two rubber tubes called pneumographs, which are strapped around the subject's chest and abdominal area, their blood pressure and heart rate, using a blood pressure cuff attached to their arm or sometimes their leg, and their sweat, typically using two electrodes that are strapped to the subject's fingertips. In some instances, a subject's physical movements are also monitored, using an activity sensor pad placed on their seat, their armrests, and or under their feet. But we won't worry about that for now. So how can these measurements determine whether or not someone is telling the truth? Well, they can't. But before we start beating the drum on that too hard, here's the thoroughly discredited logic behind how they can. During a polygraph exam, a subject is asked a series of questions categorized as irrelevant, control, and relevant. The subject's physical responses to these questions are fed back to a chart via the instruments we've just gone over. Irrelevant questions are purposely innocuous. Are you sitting down? Is the door closed? Is your name Jack? Etc. There is no reason that these sorts of questions should cause any kind of distress, and so whatever your respiration, perspiration, and heart rate are like while you answer the irrelevant questions is established as your baseline. Control questions are questions that one may often be inclined to lie to, and therefore may elicit a physiological response, but are not directly related to what the subject is being investigated for. Relatively broad questions like, have you ever hurt anyone, or have you ever stolen anything? Unlike confirming that a door is closed, for instance, knowingly telling a lie should be expected to cause some level of distress that will be reflected in the vitals that are monitored by the polygraph. How you react to the control questions will be used as a point of comparison for how you react to the relevant questions. Relevant questions are exactly what they sound like. They're the questions that are pertinent to why you're sitting in a chair with a bunch of uncomfortable crap strapped all over your body in the first place. Are you responsible for murdering that woman? Have you been sharing state secrets with foreign nationals? Did you steal that stapler from the supply closet? And so on. The ultimate tell that someone is lying to a relevant question is when their physical response to it is greater than their response to the control questions. Here is an example of a modern digitized polygraph chart. The two blue lines up here represent the subject breathing in and out. The green line is their galvanic skin response, the sweat, and the red line is their cardio tracings, monitoring their heartbeat as well as increases and decreases in their pulse rate and blood pressure. The black line toward the bottom is monitoring their movement, but again, don't worry about that for now. The green and red boxes, marked C and R, respectively denote where a control or relevant question has been asked. The white boxes indicate irrelevant questions. This is a desirable result. As you can see, the cardio and GSR tracings don't spike notably on the relevant questions, and the respiration rate stays nice and even. And here's a chart where someone got themselves in a bit of trouble. Note when this relevant question is answered, their GSR has a big spike and their cardio tracing ramps right up. Then by the time they get to the control, their cardio is evening out and their perspiration is beginning to abate. So what do you think one fundamental objection to this methodology might be? A glaring one that might have been in the back of your mind for a while now is how can these spikes be attributed to deception? How can you separate a spike brought on by nervousness or embarrassment, for instance, from one caused by knowingly telling a lie and worrying you might get caught? The answer is you can't. It really is that simple. There is absolutely no area of science, let alone polygraph technology, that differentiates between lying-related sweat and lying-related spikes in cardio activity, and sweat and cardio activity brought on by any number of other factors. Polygraph operators and companies will often deny it's this simple, and say that there are ways their device can make such distinctions. But the thing to note is that it invariably ends there.
Maybe he was uncomfortable with the question.
No.
No.
You will never get an explanation as to what those mechanics are and how they work, or in the rare event that some kind of explanation is offered up, it will falter under the most basic of scrutiny, because control is designed to offset the conflation of lying responses with other stress responses just don't exist. It's not that something is in place that's supposed to serve this function, and that thing just doesn't work. It's that there is no such thing. Period. A polygraph measures your respiration, perspiration, and cardio activity, and that's all it does. It is a prop. That prop, however, can be rather scary in some circumstances. Something that a man by the name of Doug Williams discovered years before becoming a polygrapher himself, and then eventually America's leading crusader against the machine. Williams' story is an interesting one. While enlisted in the United States Air Force in the mid-60s, Williams, unbeknownst to him at the time, came to be considered for a position as a White House communications advisor due to his seemingly spotless record.
In order to get that job, though, you have to simultaneously pass background investigations from every agency whose material you will be handling, which is every agency in the government. They gave me this number to call. So I caught a plane, flew into D.C., and called that number. It was a Marine Corps guard from the White House, picked me up in a limo, took me over to a place over in Georgetown, a little underground parking garage of some sort. Kind of ominous looking. You pull in there. It's completely empty and dark, except for one hallway that was open on the right-hand side of the deal. Said, all right, get out and go down to that room at the end of that hall. Said, I'll be waiting for you when you come back. I walk in there, and this big, fat, bald guy smoking a cigar, claimed he was from the CIA. He was sitting there with his old gray government desk, leaning back in his little roller chair, and had a chair for me with an armrest on the front of it, in front of the desk. And he had the instrument. I didn't even know what the fuck it was. It just had tubes out of it, and straps and what have you, and dials and needles. And he said, sit down. On that table now, there's a polygraph, all the instruments for pneumotubes and all that shit, and then government issued 45 automatic. He says, one of two things is going to happen here. He said, if you fail this lie detector, I'm going to take this 45 and blow your fucking head off. But if you pass it, then you get to go work in the White House. So that's one of those two things going to happen here.
Evidently, he passed, because Williams did go on to work at the White House, head very much intact, personally handling communications for President Lyndon Johnson for 3 years, and then Richard Nixon for 6 months. As prestigious as a job reporting directly to the President of the United States may be, it also proved to be a drain on Williams over time, and he began looking for a career transition.
Well, I joined the police department because they were giving a 6-month early out if you joined the police department in your hometown, because they were out of young men to join the police department because they were shipping everybody to Vietnam. So they came along with this program saying, we'll give you 6 months early off your enlistment if you'll join the police department in your hometown. I said, well, I'm gone. I'm out of here. Worked a couple of years patrol, and then worked up in headquarters. I was trying for a detective, but I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I said, man, it's a long haul to make. And I was really having my sights on. Anyway, I was cruising down the hall, and I see this notice for a job opening. They wanted a polygraph operator, and it held the rank of sergeant, immediate promotion to sergeant. And I got the job.
And so, several years after his first rather dramatic encounter with the polygraph, Williams had become reacquainted with the mysterious black box. Only now, he was sitting on the side of the table, once occupied by the cigar-smoking spook. It would still be some time down the road before he became its most vocal critic in the nation, but that's not to say that Williams did not have some skepticism of the polygraph when he began working with it.
From day one, I knew it was bullshit. I absolutely was certain this is bullshit. There ain't no damn way they can detect deception with this contraption here. But I also knew it was one hell of a good prop for a good interrogator. And if there's one thing I was a damn good interrogator. And I thought, boy, I can use this to good advantage here. I said, I'll go back. I'll bust me a bunch of criminals with this son of a bitch because I will scare the shit out of them, which I did. But I knew from the get-go it wasn't no lie detector.
The polygraph's role as an interrogation prop is the single most important thing you need to appreciate when understanding what its true purpose is. A little later, we'll break down the performance tactics involved with a real-life example. But for now, broadly speaking, the trick behind the polygraph, especially in a criminal context, is that it's only as effective as the person being subjected to it believes it to be. Because polygraph results are barely ever admissible in court, even badly failing an exam won't really have a detrimental effect on one's prospects of avoiding a conviction if they just scoff at the results and walk away. But if they buy into the lie that they have been caught out and are now left without any recourse, it can go a long way to procuring a confession, which, needless to say, can lead one much closer to a long stretch in prison. And so, a large portion of the polygrapher's job has nothing to do with conducting the actual test, but rather selling the subject on the validity of its results. One of its co-inventors, Leonard Keeler, would literally use card tricks to this end.
I'm going to try an experimental test now. I want you to take one of these cards, look at it, remember the card that you chose, and then place it back in the group. I'm going to ask you one card at a time. And I want you to say no to each card that I ask, including the chosen card. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Did you choose the 7 of clubs?
No.
Did you take the 3 of spades?
No.
Did you take the Queen of hearts?
No.
Did you take the Ace of hearts?
No.
Did you take the 5 of diamonds?
No.
You took the 5 of diamonds, Frank. Did you?
Yes, sir.
The thing is, Keeler would take certain measures, such as marking the cards, to ensure the polygraph didn't fail him, a rather good indicator that even he didn't believe what he was peddling. Some polygraphers will even use trick decks, switching a randomized one with another that's comprised entirely of the same suit and number while they divert their subject's attention. There are all sorts of variations of these techniques, but invariably, before any polygraph test, there will be a mock test, ostensibly to make sure everything is in order and the subject is responding appropriately, but in reality, the real goal is to convince the subject that they are responding appropriately. No matter what your chart winds up looking like, you can be confident you'll be told you're a terrible liar, and therefore an ideal subject for a polygraph exam. But the polygraph isn't just used in criminal contexts. In fact, back in Doug Williams' heyday, it was so prolific in the private sector that countless people who not only had no criminal record, but weren't even under suspicion for any specific wrongdoing, were forced to take exams. A very lucrative situation for polygraph technicians.
I was making probably $700-800 a month as a sergeant. I could make that every week running polygraph tests off duty, easily. So I signed up and started working off duty running pre-employment polygraph, because back then, everybody had to take polygraph tests to get a job, whether it's a store clerk or bank teller or whatever.
But over time, Doug Williams began to grow increasingly disenchanted with his profession.
I never did get as corrupt. I was a little bit corrupt because I'd lied about how it worked and convinced people it worked when I knew damn well it didn't, but I wasn't as bad as most of them. It's sickening after a while. Like, for instance, they'd brag in their little meetings. Well, I hit Eckert Drugs, which is a local drugstore here, for 20 tests to fill 2 openings. What that means is making $150 a head in 1972 to run a 15-minute test, and he deliberately failed as many people as he could so he could keep cranking them through there to fill 2 fucking openings. That's wrong. There's no other way to frame it. That's wrong. Now, they started taking it even further. They started using it as a requirement in the federal government. Every job with intelligence or police or any law enforcement in the federal, state, or local government has to take a polygraph test. That's bullshit. We're relying on a total fraud to protect our national security.
He kept on with it for a while, though, rationalizing that even if the machine was fundamentally a fraud, it still did some good.
Until I figured out how to control every tracing on the chart myself. Some buddies of mine came in. I was starting my day shift, and they were finishing up the midnight shift. They came in for a cup of coffee, and they was telling me about a chase they got into the night before. He was shooting at us, we was shooting at him. My partner lost control of the car. We went out across the bar ditch, tore through a barbed wire fence, said, man, pucker factor was way up there. Man, I was pinching donuts out of that seat. I thought, pucker factor? I heard that in Vietnam, say, pucker factor. That means you're going down a trail scary as hell and your asshole's tightening up because you know you're going to get shot in the next second or two. So I said, okay, well, that's a physiological response to fear, isn't it? I hooked myself up to polygraph, tightened up my anal sphincter muscle like I was trying to stop a bowel movement, blew out the best cardio tracing you ever saw. Now I know how to control everything. I know what the breathing pattern looks like, and I know the GSR mirrors the blood pressure. Because the blood pressure increase, GSR goes along with it. I got control of everything. Now all I got to do is figure out which question to switch, when to react, when not to, and I've got it wired.
The pucker factor. To clarify exactly what Mr. Williams' discovery was, after observing that the tightening of one's anal sphincter is a physiological response to fear, he wondered if it could essentially work in reverse. If you clenched those muscles, would the corresponding physiological tracings spike, even in the absence of actual fear? And he found that is precisely what happened.
A sphincter says what?
Whatever you want it to. Get a control question, tighten it, your tracings will spike. Get a relevant question, loosen it, your tracings will relax. Now your responses to the controls are greater than your responses to the relevance, and therefore, in the polygrapher's eyes, you're telling the truth. But hold on, you might say. Regardless of guilt or innocence, why would your reaction to a generic control like, are you an honest person, be greater than your reaction to a question that's relevant to what you're being investigated for? Well,
we can't sit here and evaluate the polygraph technique because it's bullshit. What we got to do instead is we got to say, okay, what are your rules? What do you say constitutes a perfect, truthful chart? They say, and they act accordingly, if you have no reaction on any relevant question, and you have a reaction on at least one control question, then you have passed the test, truthfully. Because why? Because that little squirrely question about whether you ever stole anything from someone who trusted you bothers you more than all the really important questions. Don't make sense, but that's the way it is. They're mixing apples and oranges. There's no way you can compose a control question that has the same emotional impact as a relevant question. They try to do it, but it doesn't work. So we're not going to evaluate their technique. I can do that myself. I teach people how to play by their rules and produce what they say they want to see. That's how they make the game played. That's how we'll play it.
And that's exactly what Doug Williams dedicated the rest of his life to doing. teaching people to play by the polygraph's stupid rules and win. He quit his job with the police force, started living out of a 67 panel truck he dubbed Moby Dick, and supported himself by working odd jobs between roaming the country to give seminars and distribute his manual How to Sting the Polygraph. He also appeared on a variety of national news programs, including a segment on 60 Minutes in 1986 that featured a rather revealing experiment he helped orchestrate.
I can watch you breathe, I can watch two fingers sweat, and I can watch your heartbeat. How can I presume to say that I can tell whether you've lied?
So, can a lie detector tell whether someone is innocent or lying? We went to a CBS-owned magazine, Popular Photography, to help us find out. 60 Minutes researcher Janet Tobias posed as the personnel assistant for the magazine. She called polygraph companies and told them a Nikon camera and lens had been stolen, and that she needed their services to help find the thief. In fact, no camera had been taken, but 4 Popular Photography employees, aware of what we were up to, agreed to take lie detector tests. Julia, an editorial secretary, Bob, a part-time secretary who also sings in a rock band, Lorraine, who is a production editor, and Paul, who helps put together the proof pages for the magazine. Their only assignment was to tell the truth. For 2 hours, Kevin Cassidy of Spartan Security Services tested Julia and then Lorraine.
Last week, did you steal that Nikon 2000 camera and zoom lens from the equipment?
No.
He said neither of them had stolen the camera. But earlier, when Cassidy first arrived, we had given him a tip. We told him the thief might be Paul. Paul didn't know that we had implicated him. And remember, no camera had been taken.
Last week, did you steal that Nikon 2000 camera and zoom lens from the equipment room? No. You had any trouble with the local?
He told Paul, "You come up very shy as far as truthfulness goes." He even filed a report which said that on key questions like, "Did you steal that Nikon 2000 camera and Nikkor zoom lens from the equipment room?" quote, "It is felt that the subject was deceptive."
After having one innocent employee pegged for stealing the camera, they then ran the experiment 2 more times using 2 other polygraphers, tipping them off to 2 different employees respectively. And just like the first time, in each instance, the person the polygrapher had been tipped off to yielded a chart that indicated they were being deceptive. This highlights another significant problem with polygraph methodology. The big selling point of lie detectors is that they remove the folly of human bias in favor of scientific verification. We don't need to worry about the imperfections of a person's intuitions anymore, because now we have a machine unburdened by such things. But in reality, a polygraph is very liable to serve as an extension of an investigator's confirmation bias, rather than a modulator of it. If a polygrapher suspects the subject they're testing, or knows that the people who have sent this person to them think they're the culprit, that can have a subconscious effect on things like the tone of the polygrapher's voice when they ask the relevant questions, which in turn can have an effect on how nervous the subject feels when answering them. And that's in a relatively benevolent scenario. Other times, a polygrapher may have such an effect on their subject on purpose, either because they're in collusion with the investigative body, or even for a purely selfish reason, such as,
it justifies their existence. Look at what this guy admitted to me that you guys would never have found out had it not been for me. Boy, he's got some deep, dark secrets that we're hiding in there, and I'll weasel them out of him. But boy, you better owe me, because he could have slipped through if it hadn't been for me.
As if Doug Williams' assessment of the polygraph wasn't already scathing enough, he goes as far as to argue that it even has a bias against honest people. So how does that work? Put simply, dishonest people tend to be less nervous when telling lies. They're well practiced in it, and there's all kinds of examples to back up this theory. Just to name a few, CIA officer Aldrich Ames was arrested on charges of espionage in 1994 after being discovered to have acted as a double agent for the KGB for just shy of 10 years. He had regularly passed polygraph checks for the entirety of that period. Defense Intelligence Agency analyst Ana Montes was arrested in 2001 also on charges of espionage, having acted as a spy for Cuba since joining the agency in 1985. She had regularly passed polygraph checks for the entirety of that period. Edward Snowden was responsible for leaking a trove of classified documents from the NSA in 2013. This video will make no argument one way or another as to the righteousness of his actions, but that they were in breach of his security clearances is beyond dispute. He passed multiple polygraphs before fleeing the country in advance of his disclosures. Throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, dozens of women began disappearing and then winding up dead around the Green River and other dump sites throughout King County in Washington state. At one point in the long-spanning investigation, a cab driver named Melvin Wayne Foster came onto the radar of authorities after actually contacting the police wanting to help. He had some suspicions of certain colleagues. Investigators spent a considerable amount of resources scrutinizing Foster as a significant person of interest, executing a thorough search of his home on 2 separate occasions, and keeping him under 24-hour surveillance for several months. To be subjected to that level of inquiry, you might think that there must have at least been some rather eye-raising circumstantial evidence around Foster. But no. The main driver behind authorities' concerns was that Foster had failed a polygraph. He was eventually cleared as a suspect after DNA samples he provided could not be linked to any of the victims. A DNA match was eventually found in 2001, implicating Gary Leon Ridgway as the infamous Green River Killer. Unfortunately, it can't be said that he got away for that long, because he managed to avoid raising any suspicion whatsoever during his career as a serial killer. He had become a suspect as far back as 1984, but investigators ultimately decided to move past him. After all, he did pass a polygraph. Over the years, the polygraph's prevalence in wider society has thankfully receded significantly. The Employee Polygraph Protection Act, passed in 1988, has put severe limitations on its use in the private sector within the United States, meaning if you have a run-of-the-mill occupation, like retail for instance, you can rest assured you will not be subjected to one as part of an application process or a routine check that you're not stealing merchandise. That's not to say that there are no circumstances where the average citizen might find themselves hooked up to one. Polygraphers offer their services to couples who might be experiencing issues of distrust, for instance, and those under suspicion of a crime are often asked to take one. Regular polygraphs are also sometimes a term of probation, and all kinds of government employees, especially those with security clearances, still have to tolerate the sham and all the risks of baseless accusations and undeserved punishments that come along with it. Claims are made, of course, that the technology has improved over time. But just as with the claim that polygraphers have ways to distinguish between a lying reaction and other fight-or-flight responses, specifics are never offered up for that claim. The modern polygraph perhaps tracks vitals a little closer to in real time than the original model, and now they're charted digitally as opposed to on scrolling paper, but that's it. The core tech really is the same as it's been for 100 years. The fact that Doug Williams has become a world-leading expert on the machine should speak volumes on its primitive nature to anyone who's ever tried to set up a Skype call with the man. And speaking of Doug Williams and technological improvements, a quick word on those activity sensor pads. Their supposed purpose is to register physical countermeasures, such as Mr. Williams' pucker trick. It's a rather dubious claim because, as Doug puts it,
the problem is the only way that would work is if the subject allowed them to insert it into their asshole, which nobody's going to do.
And certainly no tangible evidence has ever been offered to confirm that sensor pads can detect such maneuvers. To be on the safe side, however, in recent years, Doug has developed a new technique. One that essentially produces the same sort of effect as the pucker technique, only in a way that is a little less abrupt, and therefore appears more natural, and that is completely foolproof against physical detection should the polygraph industry ever develop a pad that really can detect the tightening of one's sphincter. So what is this cutting-edge new technology? When asked a relevant question, think of something soothing. When asked a control question, think of something scary. Yes, really. It's literally that simple. Well, okay, maybe not literally. You do need to practice disassociating with the content of the questions, training yourself to simply label them as control and relevant before visualizing accordingly. Williams has even developed some hypnosis routines to help condition people into giving the appropriate response with little conscious effort. Williams claims that he's batting 1,000 with this current method, so even if perhaps you couldn't pass a polygraph right this second with just the instruction of relevant question calm thought, control question scary thought, besides a little practice, there really isn't much more to it than that. And if you still want some evidence as to the effectiveness of Doug Williams' methods, the actions of the federal government should serve as a rather compelling testimonial. In 2013, they decided that they had had enough of his countermeasures and targeted Williams in a sting operation, sending an undercover agent to get training in concealing admitted wrongdoings when applying for a job with US Customs and Border Protection. According to Williams, they went beyond even that level of entrapment to build their case against him.
They couched it in terms of that I was doing this so that I could defraud the government or get a guy a job that he wasn't qualified for. And they literally lied about everything. Like, for instance, this first guy called me and begged me. He just begged me and begged me and begged me. In fact, my lawyer was marking it down 21 times. I told him no. I got to come over. I got to learn. Please help me. I want to pass this to 21 times. I said no because it was fishy to me. I smell a rat, I said. There's something wrong here. I'm not going to help you do this. Finally, he says, to conclude our conversation, well, man, I'm not trying to beat anything. I'm not trying to get away with anything. I already told him everything I did. I looked the other way when my friend brought in some Coke. I just don't want to be accused of something I didn't do, so I got to learn how to pass the test. That changed my mind. That's called exculpatory evidence that I had no intent to help him lie, rather help him prevent being falsely accused of deception. However, when they played that tape in court, that exculpatory evidence was strangely missing.
With his back against the wall, Williams ultimately decided to plead guilty to 3 counts of witness tampering and 2 counts of mail fraud. He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, a sentence he completed on July 26th of 2017. For a time thereafter, he was legally barred from training people to beat the polygraph. But that period has passed, and so now he's right back at it. With all that we've been over, it would be easy to conclude that the polygraph is useless, and it is, in the sense of being a lie detector. But while it is effectively nothing more than a prop, in an interrogation it can be a very useful prop indeed, and not all polygraphers are equal when it comes to using it. Technical qualifications do not really matter, of course, because the data they're analysing, or purporting to analyse, is meaningless. A polygrapher's real job is to sell their subject on the machine's integrity, and some of them are exceptionally talented at making that sale.
This is Tammy. Did you meet Tammy yesterday? No, okay. No, it's Tammy.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
If you're a follower of this channel, there is a very high chance that you're already familiar with the case of Chris Watts and his polygraph exam administered by CSI agent Tammy Lee. As a quick primer for anyone watching this video who is not, Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters in August of 2018. At the time of this interview, the bodies of his family had not been found, so their official status was still missing, and Chris Watts was merely a suspect, albeit the only one who was really being taken seriously. There is absolutely no question as to his guilt. So while the polygraph industry has largely served as the villain of this episode, Agent Tammy Lee is obviously not the bad guy in this room. But we will be analysing this footage, not to make a call on who is or is not a bad guy, or whether or not they're guilty, but rather to put everything that we've been over into the context of a real-life polygraph exam. Again, there's a high probability you've seen this footage before, but when you did, you may have been watching it while under the impression that you were witnessing a monster being caught out as a liar. Today, you'll get to watch it through a different prism. That of a monster being conned into a confession.
So go ahead and have a seat right here, Chris.
Sit on this?
Yep, I know. I'll explain what that is here in a little bit, but you don't have to worry. It's not on or anything right now. It's not gonna buzz you or anything.
Unlike the menacing man in black sitting in a smoky room archetype, such as the one in Doug Williams' story about being screened for security clearances in the 60s, Agent Lee takes the approach of using a light touch. When guiding Watts through the polygraph, she adopts a reassuring, almost maternal demeanour. And perhaps one of the reasons that the Watts interrogation has developed somewhat of a cult status among fans of this sort of footage is that this approach is brutally effective beneath its sweet surface.
I've never done this before.
I know. A lot of people haven't had polygraphs before. It's not like a normal thing that people go through. A lot of people, like obviously in law enforcement and places like that, they have to go through polygraphs for their job. But other than that, most people never take a polygraph in their entire life. So, well, and I think that's totally awesome that you're here today. I mean, I commend you. We do this in all of our missing person cases, so don't think that we're just singling you out like, oh my gosh, they want me to take a polygraph. Anytime, you know, someone was the last person to see people or, you know, it's a missing person case, we start from the inside and we work out. I mean, that's pretty much what we do. So I've done polygraphs on the Jessica Ridgway case. I don't know if you were here for that.
The name sounds familiar.
The girl that went missing in Westminster and that, yeah. And then just the one that we had in Thornton last year or the year before. So we do this all the time. So please don't think that you're being singled out. Like this is one way that if you didn't have anything to do with it, that we can let the investigators know, the people that really do need to know that are looking for your wife and your little girls, to let them know, like, you know what, don't focus on Chris, focus over here, because obviously we've already cleared him, he's good to go. Now focus on the real person that did something to this, you know, to Shanann and little girls. So, okay. And you're going to know the wording to all of the questions I'm going to ask you on the test before we even take the polygraph. So don't. A lot of people come in here and they think, oh, they're just going to, you know, attach all these components to me and then just start asking me random questions that I've never heard before, and of course I'm going to react to that. That's not at all how polygraph works. Yeah, you're actually going to probably know more about polygraphs than anyone before you leave here today, just because I explain everything to you and how everything works, okay? Obviously, you're probably nervous about taking today's test. Honestly, I would think something is wrong with you if you weren't nervous about coming in here to take a polygraph. Even if people are like, I don't have anything to hide, it is nerve-wracking. I want you to have confidence in the fact that if you had nothing to do with this disappearance, like, we're going to find that out today. There's actually only, you know, nervousness or anxiety cannot cause you to fail a polygraph. A lot of people think that too, that if they're really nervous that it could cause them to fail. If that were the case, no one would be allowed to take polygraphs because every single person is nervous or anxious about taking the polygraph, okay?
I thought that's how it worked.
On nervousness? Yeah. No.
Agent Lee's job is to convince Watts that the results of the failed polygraph he will inevitably be delivering in a few hours are on the firmest of scientific ground. But rather than achieve that effect by way of a snarling insistence that he'll soon have nowhere to hide, Lee establishes the machine's reliability by feigning a want to put him at ease. There's no need to worry about your nerves. The polygraph won't be tainted by those. Look, we're going to go through all the questions in advance, so your results won't be affected by being caught off guard. So long as you're telling the truth, the polygraph will reflect that. The irony, of course, is that all of those caring reassurances will be utterly terrifying for Watts, and Agent Lee knows it. After her opening primer on how the polygraph works, and why there's no reason to be concerned that it could implicate an innocent person, Agent Lee proceeds to do all sorts of things, including having Watts attempt to summarize the entire arc of his relationship with his wife Shanann, from the time they first met all the way through to her and their children disappearing. There are all sorts of reasons behind the various things that Agent Lee does from the broad standpoint of an investigator, but very few of them are pertinent to supposedly strengthening the integrity of a polygraph exam. There is no reason a pre-test interview would ever need to go for anywhere near 3 hours if taking the test was the real reason the subject was there.
Okay. You're going to be taking what's called a directed lie polygraph. So what that means is there are going to be questions on the test where I want you to lie.
Remember when we said that there were all kinds of variations on Leonard Keeler's card trick? The directed lie test is one of them, and Agent Lee's execution of it is absolutely textbook.
Because I want to see what your body looks like when you tell a lie on the test. Okay. I know it seems kind of weird, but you're going to know which questions these are, and they're going to be easy to answer. So it's going to be like, they're all going to start with before 2018. So this first one is before 2018. Did you ever lose your temper with someone you cared about? We've all lost our temper with someone we've cared about in our life. So I want you to think about, you don't have to tell me what it is, but I want you to actually have that moment in your mind when you actually lost your temper with someone you cared about.
Okay.
Whether it was with Shanann, whether it was with your parents, whether it was with your children, I mean, it could be with anyone, but it was
You don't want me to say no to that one?
Yes, so you're going to actually lie to that question, since we all have lost our temper with someone we cared about before. So I'm going to say before 2018, did you ever lose your temper with someone you cared about? And you're going to say
no,
because you're telling a
lie.
Awesome. So we just went through every single question on the test.
Okay.
So the only questions that you'll hear come out of my mouth. Okay, so let me go through those one more time, and you just say yes or no how you would answer them on the test, okay?
Okay.
So I kind of explained polygraph in a way that makes the most sense to me, so I just assume it makes the most sense to other people, okay? So just bear with me. Whenever your brain senses that you're in a stressful or threatening situation, it automatically kicks in these physiological changes inside your body because it thinks it needs to help keep you alive, okay? Have you heard of fight, flight, or freeze before? So, excuse me, Chris, you're walking in the woods, you hear a bear growl, you're either going to fight the bear, you're going to freeze, or you're going to run away. Okay?
Yeah.
It's kind of your brain going, you're in overload right now, you can't really process what's happening. So I'm going to give you 3 options to help keep you alive, okay? So a lot of people are like, well, what the hell does that have to do with telling a lie? Well, I'm sure you would agree from a very young age, your father taught you, that it's wrong to lie, cheat, or steal. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And that there's consequences when you lie, cheat, or steal. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So if I ask you a question, Chris, and I say, did you do whatever, and the word no comes out of your mouth, your brain will automatically sense that as a stressful or threatening situation because it knows there's consequences with that lie you just told. The severity of it really doesn't matter to your brain. I mean, you could get grounded Friday night or you could spend the rest of your life in prison. Your brain really can't really differentiate between the severity of the consequence. It just knows, holy cow, you told a lie, there's consequences with those lies, and it starts those same physiological changes inside your body.
This is nonsense. While it's true that one's fight or flight response is likely to kick in when knowingly lying, any number of other threatening circumstances, such as simply being asked a very grave and consequential question, can bring on the same physiological response. It is easy to lose sight of that when the subject being examined is someone like Chris Watts. But imagine for a moment an alternative universe where Watts is in the same situation as a suspect, except somehow innocent. His family have suddenly vanished off the face of the earth, and he knows that he is the prime suspect. When he is asked the question, "Are you responsible for causing your family's disappearance?" perhaps his knowledge of his innocence would be sufficient to keep his physiological response consistent with his baseline, but that is a total coin toss. For some people, the gravity of such a question will cause a spike no matter their lack of culpability, and absent training, their response to it will never be the same as something generic like "have you ever wished harm upon someone?" regardless of whether they've been walked through the questions in advance.
So this is the directed lie practice test. So what that means is I'm going to ask you if you wrote every single number on this piece of paper. Okay?
Okay.
I want you to be truthful to all the numbers, but I want you to lie to when I ask you if you wrote the number 3. Because
Okay.
you really did write the number 3, but I want you to say no, that you did not. I want you to lie to me, okay?
Okay.
You can relax. How'd you feel? You did great.
That was,
You remembered to lie and everything. That was awesome. So
Yeah.
you obviously are a really bad liar. Have people told you that before? Like the second you tell a lie, like they can tell like on your face that, because the second you lied to the number 3, like I don't know if you heard me clicking, but I had like turned down the sensitivity because you were starting to go off the page. So that is what I need to see as a polygrapher, because that tells me that you know it's wrong to tell a lie. And you're actually having a significant reaction when you lie, so that is awesome. So thank you for being a horrible liar. No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We don't want to be good liars, so thank you for being a horrible liar. And that just shows me that, obviously on the test when they're asking, significant stuff about your wife, if you're lying to that, it's going to be even 10 times more amplified. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much, more than you know. So that was awesome. All right, you ready?
Do it.
Okay, stay still. Do you understand I will only ask you the questions we have discussed?
Yes.
Regarding Shanann's disappearance, do you intend to answer all of the questions truthfully?
Yes.
Is your first name Christopher?
Yes.
Just breathe normal. Before 2018, did you ever lose your temper with someone you cared about?
No.
Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance?
No.
Were you born in 1985?
Yes.
Before 2018, did you ever say anything out of anger to a loved one?
No.
Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann?
No.
Are you now in the state of Colorado?
Yes.
Before 2018, have you ever wanted to hurt someone to get even with them?
No.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No.
This portion of the test is complete. Please remain still while I take the instrument out of operation. How do you feel?
Horrible.
You can relax. I think we should be able to get in one more chart, but I really need your breathing to be normal.
Okay.
You are like all
Sorry.
over the place. So.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Like sometimes I feel like I'm not breathing enough, and I'm like, like that. I don't want to do that. So.
Yeah. I just need it as normal as possible and not so fluctuated, okay?
Okay.
All right, how'd you feel? Same as all of it?
I think it was the same through everything.
For you.
It's kind of hard to relax.
No, I get it.
Chris Watts is left in the room for a little under an hour while Tammy Lee and FBI agent Graham Coder go over his results. Polygraph charts do not take anywhere near this long to analyse. It's rather commonplace for a subject to be left to stew over how their test might have come out in order to build anxiety for the post-test interrogation, especially if they're under heavy suspicion of being guilty.
So I brought Graham in here because we want to talk to you about the results, okay?
Sure.
So it is completely clear that you were not honest during the testing, and I think you already know that. You did not pass the polygraph test.
Okay.
Okay. So now we need to talk about what actually happened. I feel like you're probably ready to do that.
One thing to note about the Watts interrogation is that the investigators will never actually show him his charts. It may well be that's just because they didn't see the point, and there's nothing to read into there. We are talking about a man with no previous criminal record, who is now in the process of trying to get away with murdering his entire family. It would not be surprising if his GSR and cardio tracings went through the roof when he was asked the relevant questions. Then again, we are also talking about a man who was able to compose himself enough to strangle his wife and then smother his 2 children one after another before disposing of their bodies and beginning a normal workday. Maybe this is the kind of person whose vitals don't spike in extreme situations, just like Gary Ridgway. Ultimately, we're in the same situation as Chris Watts, in the sense that we only have Agent Lee and Coder's word to go on here. As a thought experiment, though, assume he did in fact fail his polygraph, and then imagine a scenario where he passed it. Is there any reason to believe that things would unfold differently from what we're watching now? The wife and 2 children from a family with no known enemies have suddenly vanished into thin air without appearing to take any valuables with them. Chris Watts is the sole suspect. Can you imagine if he had returned a truthful chart? Lee and Coder would currently be sitting across from him, telling him he passed with flying colours, and it looks as if they need to move past him in their investigation. Or do you think this whole process could play out just as we're about to see, even if Watts was hooked up to an empty shoebox during his exam?
I didn't lie to you on that polygraph, I promise.
Chris,
I know.
Chris, stop. It's time.
Just
Stop for a minute. Take a deep breath. I want you to take a deep breath right now.
There's a reason you feel sick to your stomach. And when people hold stuff inside, it makes you physically ill. And I can just tell on your face, I could tell from the second you walked in that you were wanting to just come clean and just be done with this. And I appreciate that because you knew sitting down in that chair that you weren't going to pass today, and you knew I was going to find out because I told you that, and then you continued to stay knowing that you could, at the end, say, you know what, I just need to get this off my chest. Like, I just need to tell you what happened. We're not here to play games. We're not here to do any of that with you. We just want to know what happened. So can you start from the beginning and tell us what happened?
Everything that I've told you, I did not lie on this polygraph. I don't know how much I could tell you right now. Like, I did not.
It's not even an option right now because you did not pass the polygraph. So I know you were being deceptive. So that's not even an issue right now. The issue right now is what happened to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. That's the issue right now.
Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about that. I know you want to tell us. I can see it in your face.
Everyone familiar with this interrogation knows what happens over the course of the next hour. Watts continues to put up a fight for a time, but the investigators baby-step him toward confessing to a third of the crime. Eventually, he tells his father that he strangled Shanann in a fit of rage after she smothered their daughters. He then took the bodies to his worksite, where he buried his wife in a shallow grave and dumped his daughters in 2 nearby oil tankers. Not the full truth, of course, but enough for authorities to retrieve the bodies and take Watts into custody. They utilize a variety of techniques to achieve this breakthrough, which the JCS series on this case breaks down superbly. The only point that this video seeks to emphasize, though, is that all of those techniques are greatly enhanced by the sense of futility instilled in Watts by the polygraph. Not because the machine itself actually did anything, but because skilled interrogators were able to convince him that it did. With this video being decidedly in opposition to the polygraph industry, it may seem like an odd case to use as an example. After all, if the machine can serve to expedite the process of locking up a baby killer, who cares if it's a sham? A very understandable sentiment, and even Doug Williams readily agrees that when it comes to pulling confessions out of scumbags, the polygraph is an excellent tool, right up there with beating them within an inch of their life with a phone book. But the principle behind why you should be queasy over the prospect of affording law enforcement that power is the same as why you should be cautious in condoning the use of junk science to intimidate people. Just as for every monster getting the well-deserved beating of a lifetime, there's an innocent suspect suffering the same brutalization, so too is there a false confession being elicited for every Chris Watts. Not to mention the countless people who have had their careers ruined for no good reason, or any other number of indignities those completely free of wrongdoing have had to endure at the hands of the so-called lie detector. Given his total incompetence at covering his tracks, it's safe to say that Watts would have been caught sooner rather than later, even without Agent Lee's first-rate performance. It's also safe to say those responsible for investigating the Green River Killer would have wasted a lot less time if they hadn't taken the machine so seriously. And if the ultimate goal of this video were to be summarized in one sentence, it would be teaching its viewers to not take the polygraph seriously. Billions of dollars could be saved, and countless lives improved, if the entire world could in one instant understand the truth about what Doug Williams likes to describe as an insidious Orwellian instrument of torture. The polygraph can't tell us whether someone is truthful or deceptive, guilty or innocent, faithful or philandering. It is, in fact, a load of bollocks.